missing someone. Love without you. Missing someone. Love without.
So we have our marine food chain, and we have primary producers on the bottom and herbivorous consumers, first carnivorous consumers, secondary carnivorous consumers, and finally the apex consumer. And so an example of a primary producer is seagrass and kelp, and a lot of them undergo photosynthesis and help produce oxygen in the atmosphere, and they provide the basic nutrients for the rest of the food chains. An example of an herbivorous consumers is mollusks, bivalves, and gastropods, and they consume primary producers. And then we have first carnivorous consumers, and an example of that is any crustaceans, so like lobsters or crabs, they would be the ones consuming herbivorous consumers. And then we have secondary carnivorous consumers like fish, and they can consume first carnivorous consumers, but they can also consume herbivorous consumers and primary producers. And then up at the top we have apex consumers, which means that they are the top consumers in the food chain. And so an example of that is a dolphin, and they consume primary producers, herbivorous consumers, and all the other carnivorous consumers as well. So our video topic is going to be about the effect of global warming on producers and all the other organisms in the rest of the food chain.
Some examples of marine producers include lichens, cyanobacteria, giant kelp, mussels, and seagrass. Cyanobacteria contributes to Earth's oxygen atmosphere through photosynthetic activity. Kelp is important because it provides food and shelter for thousands of fish, invertebrates, and other marine mammals. Lichens have many important contributions to the marine ecosystem, such as enabling algae to live in different climates, providing a means to convert carbon dioxide in the atmosphere into oxygen through photosynthesis, just like cyanobacteria does. So an example intertidal food web that incorporates some of these producers that we've talked about is one that includes lichen as the primary producer, and then limpets as the herbivorous consumer. The secondary consumer is mussels, which feed on limpets. And in this food web, the apex consumer is the sea star, which eats mussels.
So for the sea star, the phylum is Echinodermata and the class is Asteridia. And sea stars have the ability to regenerate amputated limbs, and it's an adaptation to its dangerous marine environment and when in their predator-prey relationship. And mussels, the phylum is Mollusca and class is Bivalvia, and mussels can tolerate dehydration and thermal stress, and it allows mussels to live in higher areas of intertidal zones. For limpets, the phylum is Mollusca and class is Gastropoda, and they have strong foot muscles that attach the shell to the rocks, and it prevents desiccation. And for lichen, the phylum is Escomycota and class is Lichanormycetes, and it can withstand extremes of moisture and temperature.
In most ecosystems, and especially marine and intertidal ones, temperature is a key abiotic factor, which means that changes in temperature can have great effects on organisms that live in the ocean. So algae, which is an important marine producer in a lot of food chains, is very sensitive to changes in temperature. This means that above a certain temperature, photosynthetic activity is greatly reduced.
So how does global warming affect the intertidal zones? So one of the first effects of global warming is that water temperature rises. And so as the global temperature rises, that affects the waters. And when the water temperature rises, it results in decreased photosynthetic activity. So cyanobacteria, kelp, and those are all affected. And the second effect of global warming, because glaciers melt and ice melts, is sea level rises. And that results in destruction through erosion and intrusion of salt water into water table, which is really bad for organisms that need to live in a certain salinity level. That changes the pH of certain habitats, and so it really endangers our primary producers and other herbivorous consumers and the rest of the animals in the food chain. And the third effect is if the water temperature is very high, then enzymes cook and denature. And once that happens, animals cannot function properly because their proteins will not function properly, and that affects their whole homeostasis and the body function. And so that's really risky. And the fourth effect of global warming is due to high temperature, zooxanthellae die, and zooxanthellae are organisms that live in symbiotic relationships with corals, and when they die, the corals die as well because they depend on zooxanthellae to function. and the death of the corals has been observed all over the world, and it's actually one of the biggest problems that we are having due to global warming. And coral is a very important system for our ecosystem, and also it is the habitat for many animals and other organisms, such as the herbivorous consumers, first carnivorous consumers that are in the marine ecosystem.
So extreme changes in temperature can actually have effects on other levels of the food chain other than just the producers, such as extreme temperatures result in limpet death, which is actually an herbivorous consumer. Something that's important to remember when considering the effects of global warming on food chains is that all organisms are interconnected. So this means that one negative effect produced by global warming can have many indirect effects on other marine organisms. It's important that we all work together in order to take preventative measures against global warming in order to protect our Earth, our oceans, and all of the organisms that live in them.